So you are in Photoshop, you opened Photoshop, you probably don't see this image I have over here, but I just opened this to show you something. But imagine there is no image, you opened Photoshop, and what to do, how to start working with Photoshop when you don't see anything like that. First thing I recommend to you, before you start working, familiarize yourself a little bit with Photoshop. And the great thing to familiarize yourself is to set up how the Photoshop is supposed to look to make it comfortable for you. So the best thing is to set up preferences. Let me open the image at first. I'm not going to tell you anything about opening image, but I need this to show you something about preferences. So I'm going into edit, and on the bottom you can see preferences. So I'm going to start with general preferences and tell you a few things. How can you make Photoshop suitable for you? How to make Photoshop to be comfortable tool for you. In the general settings, we don't really have much to do, but as you can see in options, you don't have this box checked as a default. The thing is, when you have Photoshop, it often shows you the welcome screen on the launch. And I don't really like this. It bothers my job because there's no reason when you open Photoshop to have this welcome screen every time. So if you don't like this as well, just don't show this, because it slows down your work a little bit. It takes some time to turn it off, to just close it. So just turn it off. That's my recommendation. And the other thing, you probably want to familiarize yourself with interface. Maybe you don't like the color, maybe you want the color to be dark, or maybe you want the color to be really bright. So here is an option for you, and you can actually change this. I'm showing you just the basic things as a person that just starts with Photoshop. So we're not going to look into all of the preferences, because you don't need this. When you start Photoshop, I wasn't using preferences for the first few months, and I don't think that's something that should bother you at the first place. But the thing is, just make it comfortable for you. So after you choose your color, which you can change of course every time you want, let's go to the standard screen mode. And we have border. That's, simply speaking, it's a border of your image. So by default, it has option like drop shadow. And that was the reason why I opened this image, because I wanted to show you how does it looks like. Even if you haven't opened the image yet, you can decide whatever you want. It's again not so important, it never bothers me, but you can notice just a little shadow under the image over here. So it's just a way your Photoshop looks like. If you don't like this shadow, you can just hit none and you don't see the shadow anymore. You have just clean image. So that's the other thing I really recommend. Next, let's go into text. If you open Photoshop and see that your font over here or over here is too small and it just looks not really that great, that's how you can resolve this problem. Font size, as you can see, I set up as a large, even though my font is not really large. Why? Because Photoshop set up as a default and it just adjusts this into your screen. I have small screen, I have 1080p, the screen resolutions, so it thought that everything's supposed to be very small. I think that's then one thing that Photoshop should work a little bit more, but I believe they will. And you can always do it on your own. So my font size is as a large right now. It's pretty much well, I can see everything well. But if it starts with tiny, of course you cannot see this, but as I remember, I opened Photoshop and it was small, and I was looking how to resolve this. I found this, and with large it looks so much better. Of course, to make you see how does it looks as a small, I have to turn off Photoshop and then just open this once again. So if you see everything too small, the font, you can change it here. Another thing, if your panels and in general the interface is too small, here's another option. Usually auto works very well, but for example, if you have really big screen and if you have huge screen resolutions like 4K maybe, The thing is, you might find it more comfortable to work with scanning 200% once again. To see how does it looks like, you have to turn off Photoshop, but it's going to look only well when you have really massive screen resolution and big screen, and then everything around will be too small. You can change it into 200%. That's only one option you can choose. Instead of this, you stay with 100 or auto, which is basically the same. I find this comfortable for me. Everything looks clean. And that's the basic things I wanted to show you. About the other things, there's no reason to walk through this because it's not so important when we start with Photoshop, and we don't have to talk a lot about this. Other thing that you might be interested about is performance. So basically it's how many of RAM your computer use for Photoshop, and as a default is 70%. It's pretty much okay. I don't think there's a reason to change this. Of course you can. We work with ideal range right now. You can pull it more if you don't use the computer for anything else. I think it's okay if you can use more, but as I said, ideal range is around 70%. So if you use your computer for Photoshop, but if you do some other work, just keep it at 70% and it will be all fine. The thing that should bother you a bit more is history states. Probably you know about something like doing step back. In Photoshop, we need to do step back sometimes as well. So if you want to have possibility to do really a lot of step backs, as you can see, you can. Of course, it takes a bit more RAM, so I prefer to keep it low. I usually work carefully, and I'm going to teach you how to work carefully so you don't really need to have so many history states. And about the basic things, that would be all what I wanted to show you in preferences. Check the cursors and you can change the cursor, how you want your cursor looks like. As you can see, it can have few different views. You can notice it here. I prefer with everything as a standard. Here, normal brush tip. As other cursors, I keep standard. I just feel comfortable like this. So that was your basic preferences that you can take care of when you start. Of course, I'm going to change interface. I feel really comfortable with this basic and default interface because I didn't know how to use preferences when I started with Photoshop. So first few months I was working only with this interface, and I've got used to. So that's everything I wanted to tell you at first about preferences, and now we are ready maybe to familiarize ourselves a bit more with Photoshop.